Thanks to the efforts of organizations like the DNA Doe Project, as well as advancements in forensic technology and the ever-increasing popularity of genealogy sites, now, more than ever, we are seeing decades-old cold cases finally see a resolution. In 2022, we saw the identification of Joseph Zarelli, formerly known as the Boy in the Box, one of the most well-known John Doe cases in the US. Though the circumstances of Joseph's death are still unclear, it seems that answers are not as far away in such cases as they once used to be. Join us for today's episode as we take a look at 3 decades-old cold cases that were finally solved. Gretchen Harrington. On the morning of August 15th, 1975, 8-year-old Gretchen Harrington left home to head to her summer Bible school. A resident of Broomall, Pennsylvania, Gretchen's church, the Trinity Chapel Christian Reformed Church, was not even half a mile from her home. But somewhere along the way, something happened. Gretchen never made it to Bible school. Her father was the pastor of a secondary church location and was friends with David Zanstra, the pastor of the church Gretchen was headed to that morning. After a few hours, he was alerted to his daughter's disappearance and requested that Zanstra call the authorities, which he did. An extensive search for the 8-year-old soon began, but no sign of her was found. Just short of 2 months later, on October 14th, skeletal remains were discovered in Ridley Creek State Park, not far from where Gretchen went missing. The remains were soon identified as belonging to the 8-year-old, with the cause of death being determined as injuries to the skull. The case was ruled a homicide and an investigation began, but it grew cold before long. In 2023, almost 48 years after Gretchen's murder in 1975, an arrest was finally made in her case. On July 24th, the Delaware County DA's office announced that 83-year-old David Zanstra had been charged with criminal homicide of the first, second, and third degree, as well as kidnapping of a minor and possession of an instrument of crime. The break in the case came just 1 week earlier, when investigators decided to re-interview Zanstra, the pastor of the church Gretchen was attending on the day of her disappearance. Chillingly, not only was Zanstra a devoted family friend, but one of his daughters was Gretchen's closest companion. Police noted that during their 2023 interview with him, he initially denied being involved. However, when he was confronted with evidence of sexual misconduct in the past, he broke down, telling detectives that he had seen the little girl walking alone on the road on the morning that she went missing. Zanstra claimed that he offered Gretchen a lift to the church, which she accepted because she knew and trusted him. Instead, he took her to a nearby wooded area where he parked the car and asked her to remove her clothing. The 8-year-old refused, however, much to his anger. He struck Gretchen with his fist, leaving her bleeding. Believing she was dead, he covered up her body and fled the scene. DA Jack Stolzheimer labeled Zanstra as a monster, stating, "This is a man who was a remorseless child predator who acted as if he was a friend, a neighbor, and a man of God, and he killed this poor little girl." He added that Zanstra played the part of a family friend for years after Gretchen's death. Investigators had decided to revisit Zanstra when, in the autumn of 2022, a woman came forward wishing to speak to somebody about Gretchen's case. When connected with an officer, the woman stated that she thought she knew who the killer was. Remarkably, she had diaries she'd kept from the 1970s, in which she'd written down some of this information. She had been just 10 at the time of the murder, and lived in Haverton, around 3 miles east of where Gretchen went missing. This woman had, as a child, also been friends with one of Zanstra's daughters. She recalled sleeping over at their house frequently and told police that one time she awoke in the middle of the night to find Zandstra molesting her. When she moved, he hurriedly exited the room, but he came back the next night to do it again. When she asked her friend, Zandstra's daughter, about his actions, she replied, "He does that sometimes." When she got home, she told her parents about the incident. They immediately forbade her from sleeping over at the pastor's house. In her diaries, the woman also wrote about an abduction involving a friend of hers named Holly. She wrote, "Guess what? A man tried to kidnap Holly twice. It's a secret, so I can't tell anyone, but I think he might be the one who kidnapped Gretchen. I think it was Mr. Z." Witnesses on the day of Gretchen's disappearance had seen her speaking with a man inside a car. Some eyewitness accounts claimed the car matched Zandstra's. Still, investigators back then had been unable to concretely connect the pastor to the crime. DNA was collected from Zandstra at the time of his 2023 arrest, and it will be submitted to see if it matches any open and unsolved cases. Investigators have expressed their concerns that due to his role as a pastor, Zandstra could have abused many more children. Laura Kempton. 23-year-old Laura Kempton was found dead on September 28, 1981. She had last been seen in the early hours of that morning entering her home, a ground-floor apartment on Chapel Street in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Her body was discovered by a police officer who had come to serve her a court summons related to unpaid parking tickets when he noticed that the front door showed signs of a break-in and spotted a body through the half-open door. The crime was heinous. Laura had been covered by a mattress and bedding, her ankles tied by an electrical cord. She had been sexually assaulted before death. Authorities added that it was likely a wine bottle which was used to attack Laura before, during, or after the assault. Laura was a student at the Portsmouth Beauty School, where she was studying to become a hairdresser. She was also an employee at the Marco Polo gift store and Karen's ice cream parlor. Hard-working and social, she was known to be a free spirit with a big personality. Investigators who began to look into her demise discovered that she likely died shortly after arriving home. She had suffered blunt force trauma to the side of the head. For weeks, detectives attempted to chase down leads and understand the murder, but weeks turned into months, and months turned into years. Answers were still out of reach. The case went cold. Then, in 2023, an announcement came. Laura's killer had been identified. Ronnie James Lee was a 21-year-old man living and working in Portsmouth at the time of the murder. Assistant Attorney General Rachel Harrington noted that there was no evidence that the two knew each other. Lee was born in 1960 and served briefly in the military until 1981, before he began working for MBI Security at Liberty Mutual in Portsmouth. In November 1982, he was arrested for theft. He was living with his mother at the time. Laura's murder wasn't his only crime. Lee had been convicted of a string of offenses, including 5 burglaries, 2 of which he pled guilty to, as well as sexual assault. In 1987, he was convicted of the latter case, which stemmed from another burglary. He was in prison for 3 years following the conviction. While Lee cannot be charged in the case, investigators now consider the murder solved. Lee died in 2005, aged 45, of acute cocaine intoxication. Had he lived, he would currently be facing first-degree murder charges. Ruth Marie Terry, formerly known as the Lady of the Dunes. On July 26, 1974, the decomposing body of a woman was found in Race Point Dunes, Provincetown, Massachusetts. She was found amongst shrubbery, yards away from a road, and was believed to have died 2 weeks prior. She was lying face down on half of a beach blanket. Investigators theorized that she knew her killer, or had been killed while she was asleep, due to the fact that she had no defensive injuries and there were no other obvious signs of a struggle. She was described as being around 5'6" and weighing 145 pounds, with red hair pulled back into a ponytail. Her toes were painted pink, and she had been located with a blue bandana and a pair of Wrangler-branded jeans placed beneath her head. She had had a lot of expensive dental work done, but was missing several teeth, as well as her hands and one forearm, likely to prevent identification via fingerprinting and dental work. She was estimated to be as young as 20 or as old as 49. Jane Doe's cause of death was determined to be head injury. One side of her head had been crushed, possibly with a military-type entrenching tool. She was nearly decapitated, and her body bore signs of sexual assault, most likely post-mortem. It wasn't long before investigators hit a dead end in the investigation, however, unable to put a name to Jane Doe's face. She was buried in October 1974 and dubbed the Lady of the Dunes. The case lay dormant for several decades until 2015, when suggestions emerged that the Lady of the Dunes was an extra in Jaws, the 1975 Steven Spielberg classic. The film had been shot on Martha's Vineyard, around 100 miles south of Provincetown. There was an extra in the film's 4th of July beach scene, which shows a woman wearing a blue bandana and jeans, similar to those described as being found with the body. Nothing further came of this lead, however. Once more, years went by with no progress. Finally, in 2022, Orthram Inc., a corporation specializing in forensic genetic genealogy, began testing the Lady of the Dunes skeletal remains. On October 31st, the FBI announced that, at long last, Jane Doe had been identified. Ruth Marie Terry was born on September 8, 1936, in Whitwell, Tennessee. Not much is known about her upbringing, but in 1957, aged 21 and following a brief marriage, she moved to Livonia, Michigan, where she began working at Fisher Body Automotive Plant. Her sister-in-law, Jan Terry, recalled, "She loved her family, and her family loved her." Her brother, Ken, described her as a free spirit, adding, "She was looking for something more than just a country life, I guess you'd say." A year later, in 1958, Ruth gave birth to her son, Richard, but could not afford to care for him. She agreed to let the superintendent at her workplace adopt him in exchange for paying off her expenses. He and his wife were close friends of Ruth's. Once this process was finalized, she moved to California. Though she reached out to her son in 1972, he was a teenager at the time and was not ready to connect with her. At some point in the next few years, Ruth met Guy Rockwell Moldavin. The pair tied the knot on February 16, 1974. Moldavin was an antiques dealer in Reno, Nevada, but her family reported taking a dislike to him when they finally met. 4 months before her body was found in Provincetown, Ruth visited her family. Her grandniece recalled that the 38-year-old wasn't herself when she was in her husband's company. Family members also observed Moldavin's possessive behavior. The couple then journeyed to Chattanooga, Tennessee to visit her brother Ken, who recalled that Moldavin and Ruth had spoken about traveling around the country to pick up antiques, and they discussed visiting Massachusetts. Then, in the late summer of 1974, Moldavin came back to Tennessee. He told Ruth's family that she had gone missing from their shared home in California. Ruth's sister-in-law, Jan, noted, "He was so blunt, and he just said he didn't know where she was and all that, but he didn't stay very long." Ruth's other brother, James, journeyed to California, where he hired a private investigator to track down his sister. The PI revealed that all of her belongings had been sold, and suggested that she had left the state of her own volition after becoming involved with a religious cult. One family member theorized that Ruth had gone into a witness protection program and was unable to contact her loved ones. Richard Hanchett, Ruth's son, told the Californian, "They couldn't find anything. They confronted that Moldavin guy, and he just said she left. You know, free-spirited this, that, and the other." Meanwhile, Ruth's sister-in-law stated, "I always had a bad feeling about the guy she married." For decades, the Terrys went without answers. When the announcement came that she had been identified in 2022, her family was relieved. At least now they knew, and they could finally find a sense of closure. A month following the identification, investigators began looking into Moldavin, believing he was the last person to see her alive. They first noted that in 1974, Moldavin was driving Ruth's car and had told several people that she was dead. They then learned of his extensive criminal past. Moldovan was born on October 27, 1923. In 1958, he married his second wife, Manzanita Ryan, who disappeared along with her 18-year-old daughter from a previous marriage, Dolores Mearns, in April 1960. Moldovan was the prime suspect in the case and fled Seattle shortly after the disappearance, but was later apprehended by the FBI. True crime writer Anne Rule alleged in her 2007 book, Smoke, Mirror and Murder, that police found body parts in Moldovan's septic tank, but were unable to prove they were from the missing women. Prosecutors were reluctant to press charges without a body, and so he was never charged in connection with the disappearances. Moldovan married for a third time on July 29, 1960. Shortly afterwards, he faced larceny charges for stealing $10,000 from his second wife's family around the time she and her daughter went missing, and in 1961, he was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Unfortunately, however, a judge suspended that sentence in March of 1962 on the condition that Moldovan repay the money. In 2023, investigators announced that Moldovan had been identified as Ruth's killer. He cannot be charged because he died in 2002, aged 78, but investigators now consider Ruth's case closed. And there you have the facts. Please leave a comment down below with your own thoughts and reactions, and remember to like this video and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.